All right, welcome to yet another impromptu live stream. I love doing these with no warning just because it's kind of fun for me. Um, Mostly because I don't necessarily do these things on a regular basis. And if I do them on a regular basis, then it kind of becomes more like a job. But I had some things I wanted to talk about today, and Bill Sylvie was nice enough to agree to come on. So let's get Bill to join.
Hey,
Hey,
Tim.
you're with us. We're live to a couple of different platforms. So I just want to let everybody know the only way I'm going to really see your comments live is if you put them over on the YouTube channel. Otherwise, I'm not likely to see them because I have this nice little app called StreamYard, and the folks at StreamYard are really good at getting live stream comments from YouTube over, but from anywhere else, it's really hit or miss. Thanks for coming on, Bill.
Well, thank you for having me, Tim.
On like 10 minutes notice. One of the things I wanted to talk about was I posted something this morning, and social media is an interesting way, in my mind, to get sort of a broad sense of what people are thinking. Sometimes
hmm
you get the worst of it, but you do get a broad sense of what people are thinking. And usually I take some of those comments that are made and I sort of divide by 10 and say, okay, well, if they're way over here on the extreme edge of something, I'm going to divide by 10. And that's where most people are. Because you get some really weird stuff if you don't, especially on X or Threads or even on Instagram. But one of the things I wanted to talk about, and since you've been around almost as long as I have, by I think a little less than a year or something, maybe a little more than a year, I don't know, we're about a year
Eh,
apart. But you remember back in the sort of 80s where science and engineering was sort of a good thing, and we didn't just sort of denigrate it constantly, and we were like, hey, look, he's a scientist. That's a good thing, right? That was sort of a cool thing to do. Well,
yeah, I mean, science was growing up. Science was the thing that got us to the moon. It was the thing that won us wars. It was the thing that was, putting the space shuttle in orbit. It was the class that I struggled with because there was math tied up in it. But I mean, yeah, science was pretty all right.
yeah, it's like the Chevy Chase presidential debate thing. It's like, oh, I was told there would be no math.
Yeah. Great, great. Say what you want about Chase, man, but he could deliver. He could
He
deliver.
could deliver a line. But so I posted something this morning, and part of my YouTube channel has basically now shifted over to kind of full time science. I do have a PhD in it, and I've kind of spent the last 25 years as a working scientist. And over that time, I have seen attitudes towards scientists shift, and it was from, "Hey, science is neat, science is cool," to "What do you do with that for a living?" to "Oh, don't pay attention to him; he's just a scientist," which I actually had people tell me. Um, and today it kind of got me right. Today kind of just ticked me off in a way. And we're going to go and look at something from Twitter in a second. But one of the reasons that I sort of shifted my YouTube channel was I started rewatching the show that's actually kind of in a reboot mode now. Which, remember Connections with James Burke?
I by title.
So
I don't know that I ever watched it.
so what James Burke would do, and now he's in his 80s, he's still doing it, is he would find an invention and trace back the lineage of that invention to show you what chain of events occurred to make that happen. Right. And
Okay.
he would usually go back like 200 years and say, well, this led to this, that led to that, that led to that, that led to that. And now you've got a vacuum tube. And it was pretty neat stuff. So I started looking at sort of the general attitudes on science. And what I'm finding is a lot of people don't really understand what some scientists are working on and why we care. Like, you take gravitational waves, who gives a crap, right? If we discover them or not. Well, there's a lot of good stuff that could come out of that, not just on understanding of the universe, but technologically speaking. So I started looking around for the people that are actually talking about science publicly, and I was like, there's not many. There's Bill Nye the Science Guy, who's really doing a kid show. There's Neil deGrasse Tyson, who's really talking about astrophysics and interstellar stuff, and that's great. But there's not really anybody else, right? There's sort of a bunch of other just little things. To me, I really wanted to kind of dig into that side of it. So I started digging into all the older Nobel Prizes and saying, hey, look, here's what the guy from 1901 won the prize for, and here's how it influences your job. And that was actually X-ray machines came out of the 1901 Nobel Prize. And at the time, nobody knew what you would use an X-ray for, but hey, we found them. Now let's go find a use for them. Well,
Right.
I've only gotten up to 1914, and we've covered X-rays, nuclear decay, the guy who invented essentially MRI machines, X-ray diffraction, which proved that X-rays are waves instead of particles. I mean, all kinds of interesting stuff, which is all over my channel, and there's a whole playlist of them. And I'll have the 1915 prize out this afternoon. But I started looking at a little bit more about people's general attitude towards science, and I really like being sort of that, hey, let me go off and explain where this stuff is important, because I think people like that. But I posted something today on Twitter that just kind of, I don't know, I think it says a lot about where we're at as a society. And what I did was I saw this thing on physics history, and it was this guy named Poincaré. So it is only through science and art that civilization is of value. Agree or disagree with it. It was Poincaré's statement. But I think we've kind of ignored art and science a lot in the last however many years. And my take was, we do need to get back to the point of society where science is taken more seriously. It hasn't been for a long time. And I think how you define long time is different, and part of that is the fault of scientists, but it's a two-way street. People have to be willing to understand the value of it, but scientists like me have to get better at explaining the impact it has on daily life. And I said, I'll do my part. I thought it was a fairly innocuous statement, right? I mean, it's sort of a, hey, I'll do as much as I can, but people have to be willing to receive that information. I wound up blocking 3 people over this. And muting a few others so far, and it's been since 7 o'clock this morning, so a couple hours. Some of the comments went nuts, and this is one I'm actually about to report, but I wanted people to see it. Science is fine. The current crop of scientists suck rocks. Hubris personified. Okay, fine. Have your opinion. Science, as in bioweapons, pandemic, vax that kill you, more powerful nuclear warhead, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The world would be better off if scientists were imprisoned and warehoused. This is the kind of stuff that I'm getting back. And I'm reporting that one, by the way, because that's just too far. Those are the kinds of things I'm getting back. That's now another one, but I'm getting things like, political scientists have lost their way and have shaped the results for their political extremist views. That's what's damaged science the most. As for art is being destroyed, rendered ugly worldwide. It must be renewed to become good again. Okay, so it's the scientist's fault. And that's the common thread I'm seeing here, is that, no, society had nothing to do with it. It's all the scientists, man. They suck, right? It's their fault. And it made me think a little bit about one of the reasons I stopped doing, and I completely forgotten about this. And part of the reason I'd forgotten about it is I kind of blocked it from memory. Those sorts of people don't just show up online. Those sorts of people show up when you're out doing presentations at different places, because I used to do a lot of public speaking at schools and different events and libraries and whatnot. And always in the audience, there's one person who wants to bring up climate change. And take that for what it's worth. There's always somebody who wants you to commit on climate change or aliens or Star Trek transporters is the other one I get all the time. But some people think the government has Star Trek transporters. They're just keeping it secret. And we'll ignore the flat earthers and the moon conspiracy guys. They're a completely different bunch. But
that's probably best for everyone's sanity.
Right. But the climate change guys are always the ones that get me, right? Because they want to go, oh, do you believe in climate change? I'm like, well, sure. They go, oh, so you agree man-made? I'm like, no, you asked me if I agree in climate change. That's a different question, right? Because I can firmly believe in climate change because we've had multiple ice ages. I mean, we've had them. They're there. Our climate shifts. It occurs, right? That's not that hard. And when you want to have a viable discussion about that topic, and I can at great length because I have studied it, you can get into a discussion of what's the heat source for the Earth. Well, welcome to the heat source for the Earth, the sun. It's in the sky. It warms the Earth. Without the sun, none of us would exist.
I was just going to say, as a Floridian, it's a little closer to us. So, yeah.
Exactly.
Florida, people don't know this, but I think the sun's chromosphere actually touches the state of Florida between July and end of September every year.
Hey,
but go on, Tim. I'm sorry.
we had 106 here the other day, so you guys can have it back if you want. But Our sun is a G-type star. It's a yellow dwarf, and I can pull up all the science papers you want on it. This is the Wikipedia page. The Wikipedia page is accurate to a certain extent. I mean, you can get down in more detail if you want, but
Sure.
it's essentially accurate.
Isn't it the most common type of star in the Milky Way?
Give or take 20%.
Okay.
So 20% of the Milky Way is essentially the same as our star. Now, the interesting thing about it is it's a G-type star, which it's essentially a yellow dwarf. Nothing special about it. There's a whole lot of things about it we know, including these little spots on it. These are called sunspots, and they actually come and go. They go in cycles. They have an 11-year cycle. They have a 120-year cycle where you get more spots, less spots. And the overall luminosity of the sun actually does shift over time a little bit because of these sunspot regions. And you can get a pretty good little look at. See, there's a sunspot. That's probably 100 times the size of the Earth, by the way, if you want to know how big this thing is. Yeah. This is massive. But these sunspots will go away. And what that is, the reason it looks black, it's not actually a hole in the sun. It's just cooler than the rest of the surface. So, this is 6,000 degrees centigrade on the surface and millions of degrees at the center. But, that's probably, 100,000 degrees cooler or something. But I'm sorry, 500 degrees cooler. But, underneath it, it gets much, much cooler as you go down layers. But
I remember a few years ago, they shared some photos. Of the smallest particles they were able to image directly on the surface of the sun. And they were showing this kind of crinkly, almost brain wrinkle looking mass. And one of them was circled and it said, this area, for example, is only about the size of the state of Texas.
Yeah. And that's the smallest thing we can observe, right? So those probably came out of SOHO, which is the Solar and Heliospheric Observatory page.
I believe it was actually. It was a few years back, but yeah, I believe it was SOHO.
Yeah, so this is a $1 billion euro project that actually the Marconi, you're the guy that won the Nobel Prize for the radio. His company's still around. If that page will come up in a second, we'll take a look at that. But the thing I wanted people to realize about G2 spectral class stars is there's a type of star out there called variable stars, where the intensity is known to change a little bit over time. And guess what's on the variable star list is those G spectral class stars, right there. Look at that. And when you bring all this up, all that happens when you're doing a public speech or public talk is people are like, oh, so you deny man-made global warming. Like, not denying or confirming anything. All I'm doing is saying, let's look at all the data and not cherry pick. Science has to look at all data that inputs on your project, not just, well, let's just look at this part or this part and then draw a conclusion. And what gets me about doing these public events, and now as Twitter's another fine example, is unless you're willing to say things exactly the way people want you to say them, they will berate you and beat you until you do. Not physically beat you, but, verbally kind of get after you until you say things. Well, so you don't believe in man-made global warming. It's like, and you have to actually sit there and over again repeat, I'm not confirming or denying anything. All I'm doing is saying, let's look at all the data. And so you deny it. No, I'm saying, let's look at. So what you get is this just repetition of stuff until most scientists have just kind of given up and said, okay, screw it. I'm not going to talk publicly anymore. And so that's what I mean by a two-way street. It's not that scientists take all the blame. We certainly hold some of it, but I think some of those public interactions can certainly go better by people not pushing an agenda. And that's what happens is when those agendas get pushed in those public conversations, then some scientist gets touted as, oh, he's the one that did that. Now, somebody's about to come at me with one or two things. It's either Professor Mann who faked some tree ring data to try to prove global warming. He lost tenure. I think we can say he was ousted. You don't lose tenure ever over anything. And somebody else came at me with, oh, well, Fauci, therefore all scientists. And just because it's like saying all men, beat their wives. Well, look, this one guy beat his wife, therefore all men must beat their wives, right? You can't make that conclusion. And, the sun, for instance, like this is some of the best images we get of the sun. Don't want an MPEG because that's going to be huge, but all right, let's pull that MPEG. It's not quite as big. But government websites, especially NASA, are not notoriously fast.
Yeah, it was kind of weird when I did my gig at NASA. Like even just looking internal, you would think, oh, okay, well you're right there on campus, so no, they were dog slow right there at KSC. And I could tell some stories about that, but maybe for another stream.
Well, the reason is, right, it goes in cycles. You can only get funding every 3 to 5 years, and computers
Yeah.
just advance too quickly.
Yeah.
But the point to it is, I think this two-way street really needs to take place, but we all need to ratchet down a little bit and say, okay, let's have a dialogue and not a one-way abusive relationship. Right. And yes, there have been scientists who have gone out and said things they shouldn't have, but how much of that was taken out of context? How much of that was because he got asked the same question 19 times in a row, and finally out of frustration he went with, okay, maybe that's part of it, right? And all of a sudden this guy now believes in that and he's pushing an agenda, right? So you have to look at these things like anything. You can't just make these blanket statements, which is what I'm seeing on Twitter almost exclusively, are these blanket statements. And that is just not going to come up for me today because the NASA website is just slow. But we make these blanket statements like, well, scientists are saying this, therefore all scientists are evil. You can't possibly make that conclusion. And somebody else came up with, well, scientists shouldn't take grant money. That taints their opinion. How else are you going to fund your lab if you don't take grant money?
Yeah, I mean, it's... If I may now, for those of you who don't know me, if you're looking at the stuff behind me, thinking, oh wow, that's neat.
Yeah, that's a big series of Sunspot. That one probably came from a coronal mass ejection because of all the stuff around it. But
right on.
That's from 1998. That's an old
one. But for those of you who don't know me, the nerdy stuff around me is not. This is not like a green screen. That I put together of typical geek stuff. This is actually my library. I'm not a scientist. I'm a nerd. Tim is a science nerd, and he's done great things with it. I'm just a nerd. But even in my in my lane, for lack of a better term, I see the parasocial sort of energy pulse that happens where you get these opinions that ricochet back and forth at the speed of light. And you're talking about people saying, well, scientists shouldn't take grant money. I have, not to the degree of people been calling me out. In fact, I have a very generous fan base, and I really appreciate the people who help keep the Delver's Dungeon afloat in every way, and that includes you, Tim. But I sometimes people come to me and say, well, you shouldn't take supers or do a your Patreon, man. Shouldn't you just do it for the enjoyment? I'm like, the enjoyment doesn't buy me new studio lights when they buy out. The enjoyment's not gonna get me to get me a hotel room at a convention. The enjoyment, the things that I like to show off on the show, it's very nice that I'm able to do it, and I love the people who. I'm not saying just people who donate, but the people who watch the videos, who click on the links and everything like that, and it generates a little traction for me on YouTube. I'm not talking about just about supers and just about Patreon money, but that is what helps me get things done a lot of the times. It's not just about paying my bills around the house, although sometimes it is that, but in the balance, it comes out that I'm able to do those things because of that. And likewise, to speak to the parasocial, this came up the other day, and I did a video about the discussion, not about the nature of the argument that came up during the discussion. But Wizards of the Coast announced back in May that they were looking at taking older D&D and making it available for open development, possibly in 2025. I didn't know they had done that. And because I post a lot about D&D on Twitter, and I saw a message pop up from D&D Beyond, and they were talking about walking back a little they'd made about the 6th edition rules. And I said, hey, that's pretty cool. Now, how about putting classic D&D under the Creative Commons, like you said you guys were going to do? And very helpfully, a bunch of people said, "Hey, did you see this back in May?" And I looked at it and I said, "That's great. That's awesome." And I did a video about that. But as soon as I had posted that, now my circadian rhythms are shot to hell. I was up insanely late. But I post this, and I know Twitter's around the world. I don't expect everybody to be on God's standard, that is Eastern Coast time. But as soon as I posted that, I get a 2-message polemic, not a DM, but response polemic from somebody claiming that I'm one of those horrible old grognards who hates everything Wizards of the Coast does, and all I'm going to do is tear it down anyway, and blah, blah, blah. And he ran out of 240 characters and continued it on to the next one. And I started typing what I thought was a reasonable response. And I clicked send, and I got the error, something went wrong. And I was like, okay, maybe he deleted it. No, he blocked me.
Well, I will tell you this.
That fast. And I mean, that is pathologic, man.
Oh, I get it all the time. I had somebody go through because I had to block somebody on Twitter. I'm sure it's the same person showed up over on YouTube and started disliking a bunch of videos because I saw 9 go in a row within like a minute after I blocked this guy. So, Party at Ground Zero, you brought something about COVID should have warned us of the dogmatic use of science by CDC. The CDC needs to use science at some level. The trouble with COVID, if I can speak for my brothers and sisters in lab coats, with the exception of Fauci, because he was a politician years ago. That was an emergent. Most scientific labs or most science projects take years to execute, if not decades. That was we need a solution today, guys. And like when I'm writing a National Science Foundation grant proposal, or I'm writing one for DARPA or whoever, I take weeks to write the proposal, like weeks just to write the proposal of what I'm going to plan to go do in the lab, if not months. COVID was, hey guys, we need a solution by like 2:00. Can you help us out? Right. So it was science done in the uber fast lane in F1 Formula race cars. So weird stuff happened during COVID. Personally, the thing that I think came out of COVID that helps us a lot is people started digging into what the hell are we actually funding? Because some of that gain of function research I have severe questions with. I'm a physicist, so I don't really understand the biology, the virology, but just the end goal. What the hell was the goal with some of that stuff? So my answer was, I went and talked to a couple of guys I know, including a guy here in Dallas who's I've met on a number of occasions, went and had dinner with him, a guy named Bruce Beutler, who won the Nobel Prize in medicine. Because Bill, you've heard of the medication that basically made rheumatoid arthritis something you can kind of live with.
Yeah.
He's the guy who invented it. Nice. And he's kind of 1 or 2 generations of rats away from solving pancreatic cancer, which is going to be, if he does that, it's going to be a second Nobel. But
does he play D&D?
No.
Oh,
he goes back and he lives in his lab. So Nobel laureates, I've met a bunch of them. Nobel laureates come to a couple of varieties. Those that win the Nobel and go on to do public speaking and make a bunch of money because they want to go make a bunch of money, and scientists sometimes don't. Those that win the prize and then just retire and say, okay, I'm finished, which is cool. I mean, more power to you, because most people don't win it till you're like 65 or 70 anyway. And then there's the Bruce Beutlers of the world who wins it, throws it on a shelf, and goes right back to work because he really enjoys the work. And the only time he brings it off the shelf is when he's looking for new funding. And then he's like, hey, I won a Nobel Prize and now I want to go do this. Right. So he uses it to raise money for his project. But interestingly, since you're on, I am going to be out in California, which I might miss tonight's game. So I apologize for that. But I'm going to be
excuses too.
Going to be on an airplane. I'm sorry. I have Wi-Fi on the airplane, but I don't think people want the engine noise.
Just get a sound deadeadening mic, and there's a Starlink going. It's 2 hours, man.
It's not that. Yeah, it's louder. It's a small plane. Anyway, so I'm going to try to get when I do these Nobel Prize things. I've been doing them sort of 1 year at a time and getting up to the more recent ones. You'd asked me about that movie Interstellar a while back.
Yeah, yeah.
One of the, in fact, the main scientific consultant they had on that movie was a guy named Kip Thorne.
Mm-hmm.
Kip Thorne is a emeritus professor from Cal Berkeley, which is where I'm going to be this week, who won the Nobel Prize in 2017 for the first observation of a gravitational wave. So Kip wanted me to do something for him, and I was like, okay, I'll come take a look at it. And I was like, but hey, since you're asking me for a favor, I'd really like you to come on when I do the 2017 Nobel Prize so you can talk about it. And most importantly, why do we care about gravitational waves? Like, what the hell difference does it make if we discover things or not? And I did ask him if we could talk about the movie a bit, and he said sure. So I think we'll have to have Bill on when that conversation takes place.
Oh yeah, I got questions. I sent Dr. Thorne a fan letter once, but I don't think he'll remember me. But oh man, have I got questions for him about that?
He's got some videos out there where he answers for an hour about some of the science in that movie. So
I know, and he doesn't touch on the stuff that I want to know about. So he's in to get an earful from me in a kind way. Speaking of that, can I address a comment in the chat, Tim?
Sure.
Barrel-esque says, Twitter doesn't have enough space for nuanced statements, unfortunately, unless you do a thread that most people won't read. And now I was talking to Tim today about this, about the parasocial interactions you can have on social media. And because Tim and I were talking, when Tim and I get chatting, if I may be so bold, Tim, there's this weird Venn diagram crossover sometimes between he and I, between him talking about hard science, and I'm talking capital H, capital S, hard science stuff that like I wouldn't understand enough to know how much I don't understand if Tim really got into the weeds on some of the stuff he knows about. But then sometimes that bleeds over into our discussions about tabletop RPGs. And to go back to what I was saying about somebody like just pouncing on me, like with crampons and Wolverine claws, just going after me.
Owlbears.
Or owlbears. But anyway, I've if you go back, if you're a newer tabletop gamer, or maybe you just back in the day you didn't look at a lot of zines and newsletters or read bulletin board systems, which were kind of like our ad hoc patchwork internet in the 70s and 80s. I mean, there was an internet back then, it's just we as kids couldn't get on it.
Yeah, they charged you by the minute for a while there.
Yeah. But if you go all the way back, the first mention of Dungeons and Dragons on a publicly available internet forum was on Usenet, and it was somebody bitching about Unearthed Arcana when it was released in 1985. That sort of pathological sniping at each other. I mean, you can read the letters sections, not in the Dragon, in the Strategic Review, which preceded the Dragon, in the General, which was Avalon Hill's a trade magazine before TSR was even formed. There were people complaining at each other, saying, well, you know, Arnold Hendrick wrote an article about Pickett's charge, and, you know, I think he's a dunce, and this guy should be driven out of tabletop gaming. That never happened. Don't anybody go to Mr. Hendrick and start asking him about that. He's a fine game designer. But the point that I'm making is it has been going on probably since somebody walked in to Shah or Padishah's throne room and said, Your Majesty, I have this new game with 16 black pieces and 16 white pieces, and you move them around thusly. There have probably been arguments about tabletop gaming. But the thing about it is, now we have the immediacy of it. I posted a response to Wizards of the Coast in seconds, to the point that I would almost believe the guy just had this copy and pasted and ready to go in his right-click paste buffer. within seconds, I had someone get up my nose, call me out, and then block me on social media. It's not that we've just decided to be assholes to each other, whether it is about science or whether it is about tabletop role-playing games. We have the immediacy, and the immediacy removes a conscious filter from our ability to interact with one another in a decent manner. Now, Tim, you and I have disagreed about things, but I think between the two of us, we're holding a pretty good average of intelligence and calmness. But there's a great line by Tommy Lee Jones in Men in Black, where Will Smith said, "Yeah, but people will do this," and Tommy Lee Jones says, "People are smart, or a person is smart. People are dumb and panicky."
That's true.
And I think when you add anonymity, ease of access, and speed of communications, I think Bill might be an old school gamer who maybe doesn't appreciate all that Wizards of the Coast can do, and surely we live in a time when they have to nuance their opinions a little. No, they can just type, "You're an asshole old school gamer, aren't you? Block."
So one of the things I find funny, so let me put my science hat on and apply it to the gaming space for a second.
Okay.
Right. So so we're talking about science. I did a thing the other day on marketing and different stuff for the indie author crowd. And one of the things I find kind of funny in some ways, and this is true of some scientists and some science facilities, in that, I've worked with a lot of universities over the years, and one of the pleasures of my life was I had an office on MIT's campus for more than a decade. And I got to meet some amazing people while I was there. People who'd walked on the moon, people who have equations named after them. I met the guy who decided email would have the @ sign in the middle of it. I had lunch with him. He was kind of cool. And I asked him, I was like, "Why did you use that one?" He goes, "Well, it was the least used key on the keyboard, so we figured it would be a great thing to put in there." And I was like, that's how they made their decision, was it was the least used thing on the keyboard. So I was like, okay, sure. You got to make a decision somehow. So anyway, it was a great place to be. But an institution like that, you don't wind up with the huge ego professors. So the scientists there and the engineers there don't tend to be very ego driven. They tend to be very results driven. And even people who've won a prize, national level prize, people are like, "Oh, who cares?" Because you walk around the corner and here's somebody who's bigger than you are and has won more prizes than you have, or has a bigger equation named after him or something. So the egos tend to deflate one another very fast. When you wind up at smaller institutions, that's when you wind up with the one big ego professor, because you got sort of that one big fish in a small pond, right? But if you get a huge pond with lots of big fish, it's really difficult. So the reason the gaming community is like this, I think, is because there's one or two big fish, but it ain't a big pond. There's sort of one big group in the world, and that's Wizards of the Coast. And then there's everybody else. And that 800-pound gorilla could squash anybody they feel like, should they decide to do that. So when I see people say things like, "Oh, Bill's just trying to take down Wizards of the Coast," if Bill had the ability to take down WotC from his basement, we should all genuflect in front of Bill and say we're not worthy, because Wizards of the Coast is huge by comparison, and D&D is less than 1/10 of their business. And if you doubt that, let me just say the words Magic the Gathering and call it a day.
Yeah.
Because they're not making their money on Dungeons and Dragons. It's all out of Wizards. Yep. And one of the other things I got the other day was that, well, science and scientist communities are all, somebody said they were all sexist. And I was like, what the hell are you talking about? So I'm going to go into something. I went into it on one of my videos that I did about the Nobel Prize. But since we're doing this live stream, and we're now up to I got this going out to a couple platforms, and there's this pretty fair triple digits worth of people watching now. So it beats my normal tens of people. But for I don't even remember who it was that said the scientific community is sexist, but I want to introduce you to Madame Curie, who won the Nobel Prize in one of her 2 Nobel Prizes. She won the Nobel Prize in physics in 1903.
Wrong tab, Timbo.
Sorry. I am on the wrong tab.
Okay.
Look at that. You pick up the wrong one little mistake. It's like push one wrong button. There's a joke there about a space shuttle, but I'm not going to make it.
Set SCE to aux, Tim.
SCE dog. So introduce you to Madame Curie. Okay, she won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1903. She was the first Nobel Prize in 1901. She was on the third group to win. Her and her husband split the prize with somebody else for the discovery of a naturally radioactive material, something that was actually naturally radioactive. So she's one of very few women to win the prize. I get it, but not many women really go into physics. So just take the law of large numbers and say, okay, we've got a couple. She was the first person, not the first woman, the first person to win 2 Nobel Prizes. She won the physics prize in 1903. Then she turned around and won the chemistry prize in 1911. So between her and her husband, there were 3 of them. Her husband died very young, very shortly after winning the prize in a traffic accident or something. 2 of her kids went on to, she had 2 offspring that went on to win Nobels. So her family accounts for 5. Okay. 5. She's 2 of them. So are we sexist, or we just like, we just look for the right prize to win? And I'd like to contend that the science community is far from sexist, because I've worked around it for 20 years, and I have seen them do nothing but say, oh my God, look, a woman who's interested, please come in, right? Please join us. They've always been very welcoming. And I've known a number of female physicists and chemists and material scientists over the years. They've all been very welcoming to people of different race. Nobody cares if you're white, black, brown, purple, or green in a science lab. We just don't. Well, green we might care about because you're probably radioactive, but outside of that, we don't really care. People care about answers. They care about what you can do with lab equipment. And most of the people I find in the scientific community are not, especially the legitimate ones, are not going to berate you for not understanding the math. The math is just something we have to put up with and let other people do the math. That's what grad students are for. My apologies to all the grad students. I was one. I get it. I had to do the math too.
I'm reminded of this great quote from Einstein, where he was teaching a class, and he looked out at the students and said, "Gentlemen, please don't worry if you don't." Or don't worry if you struggle with the math. Rest assured, I don't understand it either.
The stuff is confusing. Einstein used to travel with mathematicians just so he didn't have to do it. I mean, I kind of wish I could get a couple to travel with me wherever I went, because I don't like. I mean, I can do it. I can do it with the best of them, but it's not my day of a good time. So the guy who I talked about this morning, I dropped a video this morning for the 1914 Nobel Prize, which was actually this guy right here, Max von Laue. He won the prize in 1914, right as World War I was breaking out, who I found it kind of interesting because he's connected to this guy right here. One of his students was this guy, Leo, I can't even pronounce that. But he wrote a letter for Einstein that was actually sent to the President of the United States, urging him to start a nuclear program and then led to the Manhattan Project. So he actually conceived of the nuclear chain reaction that eventually led to reactors, and he worked with a guy named Fermi and others, which was kind of cool. But if you look at it, his 2 professors two of his doctoral advisors were Max Planck, who has kind of half of modern physics named after him. What I found funny that Max won the Nobel Prize in 1918 when his student won it in 1914. So I every time I find something like that, I email a friend of mine back east whose name is John Joannopoulos, who has had 2 of his. He's a theoretical physicist at MIT. He's had 2 of his students to go on to win the Nobel Prize, and he gets kind of annoyed when he's reminded that students win it and he hasn't. But I'm like, dude, someday. But his other doctoral advisor is this guy right here, Arnold Sommerfeld. And he had 7 of his students to go on to win the Nobel, and he didn't win one, which I thought was, he left his mark, but he never got the prize because he was a theoretician. But the other thing that Max von Laue did is he was listened to publicly, but that's back when scientists were allowed to talk publicly without being shouted down, right? So he was actually a strong objector to Nazism. He was not a fan at all. And he was actually instrumental in reestablishing the German science community after World War II. And that's the kind of responsibility I think scientists should take. But instead, we get drugged down in these arguments about man-made global warming versus it just warms and let's just deal with it. Let's find a way to cope with it. Pollution bad. Okay, nobody get me wrong. I don't want to pollute any more than anybody else. But my point is that stop worrying about the cause and start worrying about the effect. Let's worry about how to deal with it. Let's worry about how to get on with our lives instead of just trying to point fingers. And that's all we're doing anymore is pointing fingers. And nobody even cares about a solution.
Yeah, I tell you, I once had a thoroughly awful day. One of the rare thoroughly awful days when I had an IT gig at a little company around here because I loved working in the IT department. And we had our morning meeting, and I was sitting there explaining how things had gone so sideways to my boss, and it was fairly early in my tenure there. And I just didn't want to come across like I was incompetent and had screwed the pooch. And I remember my boss, a guy named Steve Durkin, he just took a deep breath, just kind of crossed his arms over his chest and leaned back, gave me all the body language of, I'm going to listen to your bullshit until I decide that you've given me enough rope to hang you with. Mm-hmm. And he said, okay, well, you baseball fan, Bill? And I said, a little bit. And he named some coach, and he said, you know what so-and-so would say when his guys would drop an easy out? And I said, no. And he said, let's not worry about why it happened. Let's just fix it and move on. And that was it. That was literally it. And it was a great bit of coaching up from him. You know, yep. He didn't tear me a new one. He didn't rake me over the coals. It was, it was a really positive interaction. And I've always tried to kind of, if things slip, to remember what Steve said, well, let's not worry about why we fumbled. Let's get up off the ground and wing it out to second base and maybe get an easy out.
So, the difference between, if people ask me this because I spent so long in labs in Cambridge, the difference, why you can't reproduce MIT almost anywhere else? It's because every other university I've ever been to, in the lab, people will say things like, oh, I want to go run an experiment that does this. Great. Go find 15 ways to prove to me it's going to work. MIT's like, all right, go try it. See what happens. Right. We got enough equipment. Just go check it out. With the exception of the nuclear labs. And I will tell you a funny one about that. I used to work with this guy named Ernie Moniz, who went on to be Secretary of Energy under President Obama. And I had this idea. I said, hey, let's run this thing. And he goes, great. Wait till next week. I'll be out of town. I was like, what? I was like, why do you want to be out of town? Because it's either not going to work or it's going to work really well because you missed some of your math. And if it works really well, I don't want to be anywhere close to it. But I do want to be able to publish the before and after satellite photos as we're evacuating Cambridge. I'm like, okay, so I made a math boo-boo. He's like, oh, yeah. I was like, that's great. Let me go check my math and I'll do that again. We ran the experiment. It worked. We ran it much smaller than I was planning on. It might have gone very badly had we gone another way. But it was kind of a cool experiment.
If I could, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So yeah, you added something here. You want me to add it?
I did. I wanted to jump back and one more response to Barrel-esque because I think this is something we were talking about. But I think this speaks to our bandwidth issue that we've got now. I know an IT guy complaining about too much bandwidth, but here we go. This is basically a bad Yelp review from ancient Mesopotamia, and it reads, when you came, you said to me as follows, I will give Gimel Sin, when he comes, fine quality copper ingots. You left then, but you did not do what you promised me. You put ingots, which were not good, before my messenger and said, if you want to take them, take them. If you do not want to take them, go away. What do you take me for, that you treat somebody like me with such contempt? I have sent my messenger gentlemen like ourselves to collect the bag with my money, but you have treated me with contempt by sending them back to me empty-handed several times, and that through enemy territory. Is there anyone amongst the merchants who trade with Telman who has treated me this way? You alone treat my messenger with contempt. On account of that one trifling mina of silver which I owe you, you feel free to speak in such a way, while I have given to the palace on your behalf 1,080 pounds of copper, and Abou has likewise given 1,080 pounds of copper, apart from what we both had written on a sealed tablet to be kept in the temple of Samus. How have you treated me for that copper? You have withheld my money from me You have withheld my money back from me in enemy territory. It is now up to you to restore my money to me in full. Take cognizance that, from now on, I will not accept here any copper from you that is not of fine quality. I shall, from now on, select and take the ingots individually in my own yard, and I shall exercise against you my right of rejection, because you have treated me with contempt. So that is a bad review for a copper merchant left in ancient Mesopotamia. But
Nice.
so on the one hand, we've got again the case of, hey, here's somebody basically roasting a dude. Look at I shouldn't have taken that down. Look at the cuneiform. This probably took the better part. Yeah, this probably took the better part of a day, and this would have been the equivalent of just like a tossed off missive, right? It's yeah. I mean, this is literally this is 6,000 years old, but this probably took the guy the better part of a day to mash into a clay tablet. I don't think the problem is people's mindset so much as it is people's easy access. This individual had to think about what he was doing before he did it, Barrelesque. And that kind of concludes the other end of the thought, because he had said, Barrelesque had said, in my limited knowledge, some of the oldest documents we've ever found and deciphered are either receipts or people complaining. People love complaining. And that was the first thing that sprang to mind.
I agree. And the one thing about the scientific community, the scientific challenges we face as a country that gets to me, is that when people complain, and when people go out and make blanket statements, such as you see on X or Instagram or wherever, some of the ones that were on that post I put this morning were like, oh, well, scientists did this, therefore. Yeah, they kind of they're trying to come across like they're experts in the field. They're trying to come across like they've taken big surveys. They know a bunch of scientists. And by and large, when I tell people what I do for a living or what my education is, most people are like, except for those that have worked at NASA, because that's a different world. People are like, oh, you don't act, you're sure you're a scientist, you don't act like one. I'm like, how many have you met? And the answer is always 0. I'm like, okay, so, it's not all the image you see in the movies. Not everybody is Sheldon Cooper. I've met a few engineers that were pretty close to Howard Wolowitz, but that's another story. Especially the early years of Howard Wolowitz, which he was more like a real life Pepe Le Pew than anything else. He really was. There's a lot of them that are kind of like Leonard. Leonard was not a bad example of a scientist, a little bit more shy personally than most of them are, but most of them just want to do their job and then go off and relax. Most of them are into music or movies or RPGs or whatever. But they do have lives outside of that than other people. Yeah. Oh, you're just an engineer. Yeah, right. Don't pay attention to him. He went to a trade school, this place called MIT. Who cares about that? My favorite episode of that show, since we're sort of off topic anyway, which I think we covered what we wanted to, but my favorite, Bill, I'm going to ask you for your favorite episode of that show, and I'll give you mine, because I will tell you that when I worked on campus and that show was still on, there were theoretical physicists. So all the math on the walls in that show was correct. Okay. All the whiteboards were absolutely correct. And most of them were cutting edge stuff in whatever field they were talking about. And when they went up and talked about the boards, they were dead on. I mean, they were just exactly right. And I would actually catch myself watching the boards in the background, looking for stuff I understood or trying to correct their math. There was a couple of people in the theoretical physics group that would actually post pictures of their theories every time they made it onto the Big Bang Theory. They were more proud of that than any of the other stuff in their lives, which I thought was hilarious. But my favorite episode of that show was when one of the ones where Sheldon was upset that his research wasn't going anywhere, so he was looking for something else to do. And he wandered into Howard's engineering lab with a bunch of engineers working. He goes, the Oompa Loompas of science. Just the look on everybody's face. I'm like, they're like, Sheldon, go away.
I love it. I love it. That's hilarious.
So what's your favorite episode? I mean, I'm sure you've got one somewhere.
Okay. So, first of all, I'm going to admit this at the risk of getting kicked and banned and unfriended. I'm not the biggest fan of Big Bang Theory. But I have seen a pretty funny part. Sheldon is talking to his girlfriend, and she like just kind of grits her teeth and just decides to put up with whatever niche rant thing he's going on about. And this is something that impressed me. He was arguing about the Xbox versus I think at the time it was probably the PS4, because they were talking about CPU bandwidth limits and RAM speed and graphics RAM speed and amounts in each console. And they were right. They were right.
Yeah.
They had the computer science down pat, but he's hitting the points of his argument, and she's like, are you kidding? Like, she is fully invested, or at least pretending to be fully invested in what he's saying. And it boils down to the whole thing started. She was like, would you please just give me the catch up? Because he's going on and on. And it's like, no, I have a valid argument and I would like to discuss it with him. She's like, fine, let's go. And so he starts tearing into the console war thing, and she's like, that's crazy. And he's like, I know. And so he's like, well, I don't know what we do about it. And she just builds up and goes, give me the damn ketchup, Sheldon, or something like that. And it ends right there. And it was really great.
So do you know the backstory on who she is? The actress that plays Sheldon's girlfriend?
I don't, Tim.
The actress that plays his girlfriend is actually, remember the TV show Blossom?
Yes, I mean, I know about that. Like, I didn't know if there was like some.
She was Blossom, but she left acting and got a PhD in neurobiology. So she's a legitimate PhD in neurobiology. She's a legitimate PhD. Went back to act as part of the show, and she's like, so when she's talking about neurobiology, she's you don't have to coach her. She's like, yeah, just that's it. But the show, to me, I understand why a lot of people may not have had appeal to them, but for science nerds, it was like, dude, Big Bang Theory's on tonight. The meeting's ending early. We're all going home. It's like, that's what it was like, because how many times has there been one for us, right? But the one I would have thought. So there's an episode. I'll try to find it and send a link to it. Do you have Max at home?
Yeah.
So I'll try to find which episode it is. But there's one where the guys all go out together, and there's one of the points where all of them had girlfriends, and the girls all went out together, and the girls were trying to figure out how to relate to the guys better. So they started looking into comic books, and they started getting more and more into it as it went on. And they had this big argument amongst the girls, like, okay, so you can't pick up Thor's hammer unless you're worthy. But what if Thor's unconscious and holding the hammer, and then the Hulk picks him up? Does that make the Hulk worthy? And they were like having this argument about different ways to pick up Thor's hammer when the guys walked in, and they're like, what happened? Who are, and they were just getting really into, okay, so Thor puts the hammer on top of this person, and then Thor touches it and lifts it. It just like was these weird little edge cases of how you can actually lift up Thor's hammer, even though you may not be worthy. That just went on for half the episode. And I'm like, oh my God, this is too funny. But it was the girls arguing it, not the guys, which made it even funnier.
What if it's in an elevator? The elevator goes up. Is the elevator worthy?
That was I think that was in there. Was what about the elevator? Right? Is the elevator now worthy?
Well, I have some crazy pseudoscience about Ant-Man and breathing, but I'm not going down that rabbit hole.
I put that one on Twitter the other day, and some of the answers I got were funny. Like, what happens when Ant-Man shrinks into the quantum world and oxygen is bigger than Ant-Man? How does he breathe?
I tell you, he has Ant-Man's, the Pym particles create a Pym particle event horizon around Ant-Man, and when oxygen particles collide with it, they collapse down to his scale, and he's able to breathe then.
Okay.
Is it any crazier than anything else you've ever read or seen in a Marvel comic book or movie, Tim?
No.
Is it?
No.
Okay, well, there you go.
Far from the craziest I've seen.
I will absolutely stand by that.
All right. Well, that was sort of my daily complaint was, look, guys, scientists need to do their part, but you can't just dismiss somebody because they're a scientist because some other scientist said something goofy. That's just silly. And that's kind of my point to my direction I'm going with my YouTube channel is I'm trying to get to the point where, scientists have done a really shitty job in the last 25 years at explaining why this stuff is important to people's lives. And I think that's why science funding has been cut in a lot of cases. I think it's also in schools not really given the attention it should. I know I have kids that are high school and middle school, and I know other parents are like, why do they have to take a science? When are they going to use science? I'm like, well, it's kind of important. But let's do more football. That makes more sense. So one of the things I'm going to do with my channel is I'm going to push that side of it where I can try to explain why certain projects matter. And I decided to start with the physics Nobels because that's the stuff I truly understand. Chemistry, I'm going to have to go dig into a little bit. The medicine stuff, I'm truly going to have to dig into a little bit. But as we get to the more recent stuff, I also will eventually, and this is where I think the gaming community might enjoy it, is get more into the cutting edge stuff we're doing today with quantum computing and why it matters and things of that nature. And Bill, you're a former computer IT guy, so this will make sense. So with quantum computing, we can only do zero. With the computing we have now, we can only do zeros and ones, right? So
right, quantum computing allows you to examine either and both state at the same time. It gets spooky in the science sense. You know what I mean when I say spooky in reference to science.
Sure, but you instead of just representing two states on and off, you can represent a lot of states with a single bit.
Yeah.
So you can measure. You can, instead of saying it's a 0 1, it's all these stages in between those, and that allows you to do more things at the same time. And in the next sort of 10 years, we will actually have a quantum computer that can hold more bits of data than there are atoms in the universe. That's how close we are to that stuff being a breakthrough. Yep. And it does it because the word quantum, it means we're actually using light instead of electricity. And the reason computers have a certain speed is because if you run them any faster, the resistance in the copper wires or whatever wire you're using in your processor gets too much. It heats up, it melts. It's why we have cooling systems and the fans come on in your computer. If you could either get a superconductor, which has no resistance, therefore no heat, that would work. But those only exist at really super crazy low temperatures. So that's out. So the other answer is light. Because if you remember Moore's law, the way computers got faster over the years was we shrunk the data pathways more and more and more. So those electrons didn't have to move as far because electron drift velocity only goes so fast. So if you don't have to send the signal as far, well, shoot, it got there faster because it wasn't as distant, right? It's like me driving across the street instead of me driving to Florida. I can get across the street much quicker. Well, the only answer now, because data pathways in an Intel processor now are down to like 70 nanometers or something. They're pretty small. A hydrogen atom is 0.1 nanometer. From the edge of an electron cloud to the edge of an electron cloud is about 0.1 nanometers. So 70 nanometer data pathways is getting pretty small. I mean, that you can't get them. And what we were doing for years was they'd be 1 micrometer. Now they're a tenth of a micrometer. Now they're a hundredth of a micrometer. So they'd be just shrinking them more and more by a factor of 10 every 4 or 5 years. You can't go with another factor of 10. You're done. Right? We're at the limit.
Yeah, you run into problems of electron migration already. So
you're already there. That's why they can't get any smaller. But so now we have to go quantum or cloud computing, which cloud computing has done a lot of it. But quantum computing is going to let cloud computing look like the TRS-80 Model 2 by comparison.
Yeah, this gymnasium-sized data center full of blades of the latest GPUs. That's going to be like ENAC.
Yeah, those are gone. And what it's going to let you do is just about predict the future. I mean, it's going to come real. It depends on the data set, but if you decent garbage in, garbage out, but you will have enough computational power to do basically anything you want. And if you combine that with 3D printers, which I know you're into, Bill, which have come a long way, if you can predict what you need and you've got the ability to build what you need and you can build it on site, man, you can solve a lot of logistics problems pretty darn fast. And you can actually solve a lot of problems with like hurricanes in Florida if you know what to build 2 months ahead of time.
Yes.
To keep all the waves from being problems. So we're in a land which is interesting to me because scientifically the stuff I'm talking about in my videos was stuff that was done in the late 1800s, but it's stuff we're just now really being able to comprehend and fully take advantage of and exploit in a commercial sense. And the stuff we're looking at here today is not going to take that long. So that's sort of 100 years to get us to where we can fully exploit it. But the stuff we got today, because the speed at which the stuff is going, is going to be overnight by comparison. So we're actually kind of 5 or 10 years away from being in a, I hate to use a term like this because it sounds like I'm trying to be a politician. I'm not. The only way I can think of to describe it is a post-scarcity society where you don't really have a reason for anything to be scarce anymore. Because there's a reason, like diamonds were expensive for a long time, but now we can lab create them and it's bringing the cost of diamonds down, which is pissing off a bunch of jewelers.
Yeah, I was going to say, Tim, please don't say something's going to get you schwacked by De Beers.
They don't know where I live, I guess. But that family is actually pretty powerful. Yeah. But they've had problems lately because the price of diamonds are coming down because you can lab create them now. And you can lab create them very inexpensively by comparison to what you could. But with 3D printing, and now 3D printing at a nano or molecular level, which is really coming online, what you're seeing is you can 3D print almost down to the molecule level.
Yeah,
which is really good. I mean, your home, you've got stuff that's what, 1/10 of a millimeter?
Yeah, I can go down to 0.1. It just increases the print time out through the roof.
It does, but you can, for a couple $100, you can get a printer that does down to 0.1 millimeters, right? And yep. I've got 2 of them. I've got one that does color. So, and that's me at home with my Visa, right? Me at work, trying to 3D print stuff, I can get down a lot smaller than that if we choose to go that route. Mm-hmm. But we're living in a society legitimately now where we're going to be very soon where that sort of scarcity thing is gone. It really is. So we have to really think about how we're going to get along as a society. And if we're at each other's throats and say scientists are evil, and like that one commenter at on the Twitter post I had at the beginning, it's like, oh, scientists should be kept in a warehouse. Yeah. That's not how this is going to work. Right.
All I can say to that guy is put down the Pol Pot pipe. Okay. Just step away from the totalitarian vibes, buddy.
I wanted to put my Sergeant Imholt hat on instead of my Professor Imholt hat and answer that one, but I let it go. There are certain times when you can play that game, and then there's other times when I want to be like, okay, remember Ghostbusters when Egon got mad and he was like, "Your mother."
Yeah. You are a poor son.
Your mother. There are times when I kind of want to do that, but I've behaved myself. So that was the whole thing I wanted to talk about today. Bill, unless you have something else.
I don't, Tim. I have Ed McMahoned to your scientific Johnny Carson enough today, I think.
I do apologize. I probably won't be on the live stream tonight because I'll be on an airplane and it's a small airplane. So
you keep finding ways to duck out Snake's death. That's what you're trying.
You can kill him off. I'll just roll up a new one. It's fun.
I don't want to kill Snake off while you're not there. I want to see the disappointment on your face, Tim, when you fail a roll.
It's okay. Everybody fails a roll now and again. And I will say this for the gamers that are watching, I will play any version of Dungeons and Dragons that exists. I will play any board game that exists as long as I'm playing it with people I enjoy playing with. If you want to get into an esoteric down in the deep dive, is like, oh, let's look at the slight differences between 5 and 5.5. I don't care. I just kind of don't. I just want to have fun with my friends. That's really all I'm there for. And the only thing I will criticize the newer versions for is I get really tired of doing saving throws. So there's that nice rule 0 where I get to do house rules. where if you rolled a 1 and you're at -5 hit points, you're dead. I mean, just
Yeah.
we're not saving. So anyway, that's my take on it for the day. So Bill doesn't have to worry about it. He's a version 3 and back kind of guy, preferably at first edition.
First edition OD&D, and all I can say is, Wizards of the Coast, please stop performing gain-of-function experiments on Dungeons and Dragons.
They're trying to add customers, man. They're trying to bring new people. Okay, I will say this, because I know there's a bunch of gamers watching, or some gamers watching someplace. My kids would have never played first edition D&D if I had not used 5th edition as a gateway drug.
Fair enough.
So version 5.5, if it brings new people into the game as a gateway drug to get to those older versions, I'm fine with whatever the hell Wizards of the Coast wants to do.
I'm okay with that.
So you want to use it as a gateway drug and think of it like you're on your way to the crystal meth, which is first edition. I'm fine with that.
It goes 6th ed, Shadow Dark, first edition AD&D. It's just gradual steps to the treasure pit.
And where on that list is Big Stompy Robots?
Big Stompy Robots are an ancillary step when we can't have enough people for an AD&D game. But they're there.
My kids now want to get into Big Stompy Robots. So
well, get them playing some Mechton, man.
They want to do Warhammer. And I'm trying to think of the list of chores I can make them do, so I can buy all the they can buy all their own minifigs. Because
buy all their own minifigs, they're going to have to build you a new house, Tim.
See if it's that bad. Because I looked at it, I'm like, oh mother of God, that's a lot.
When your eyes bug out, that's an expense. We can have a rant about GW another time, but I will tell listeners, viewers, whatever, straight up, when I first played Warhammer in 1989, $19.99 got you a box of 24 plastic Space Marines or Space Orcs, because those were the two big factions. $20 got you 24 Space Marines. $20 won't buy you one plastic Space Marine these days.
My son has gotten smarter about it. He wants to 3D print a whole bunch of them.
That is smart. That's very smart.
I will give him the point to that. And anybody, if you're listening on 3D printing, it's interesting to do at home. I enjoy doing it, but you've got to have a lot of patience. If you like downloading the STL files and designing it, a growing number of local libraries have 3D printers where what you do is you pay them by the gram for the resulting product. And last time I had 20 of them printed out, it cost me $6. So if you want to design them and have check your local libraries, a lot of them are now adding these 3D printer options where you can have them print your stuff. And it's dirt cheap. So check it out. Anyway, that's all I had today. Thank you, everybody, for coming in. And we'll see everybody soon. All right.
Peace.
End that stream. I don't know how